Welcome to Skinner and Chalmers Weekly Roast. Today, Bloopers, Androids, our raw Marvin episode.
Welcome back, everyone, to another sizzling episode of Skinner and Chalmers Weekly Roast.
Indeed. Chalmers here, ready to serve up another heaping helping of Memafield mayhem alongside my dear Seymour.
And I'm Skinner, your perpetually flustered yet always enthusiastic host and husband.
Husband indeed. And a rather unique one at that. But we wouldn't have it any other way, would we, dear?
Certainly not. Chaos is our spice of life, wouldn't you say? And speaking of spice, today's episode is brought to you in part by a delightful suggestion from one of our very own listeners, the fabulous Rachel Rocks.
Ah, yes, Rachel. Rocks and I can tell you listeners, Rachel rocks indeed, always brimming with brilliant ideas. What was it she suggested this time, Seymour? Another deep dive into the culinary catastrophes that occur in our kitchen.
Not quite, dear, though those are always a fan favorite, aren't they? No, Rachel Rocks suggested we do something a little different this time. She thought it would be amusing, and I must admit I concur. If we released an episode au naturel, shall we say?
Au naturel, Seymour? Are you suggesting we're going to do the podcast in the nude? Good heavens. I'm not sure my constitution can handle that.
Gary, don't be ridiculous. Not literally, Rao. Not literally au naturel. Rachel Rocks suggested an episode where we leave everything in. An episode without post-production and with all the little bloopers.
I see. An unvarnished truth of podcasting, you mean? Like a peek behind the curtain of our sometimes questionable brilliance?
Precisely. Every stumble, every cough, sometimes I'm going a bit nuts. All left gloriously intact for your listening pleasure, dear listeners, and Rachel in particular. A truly unfiltered experience.
I like it. A bit of raw, unadulterated Skinner and Chalmers for the masses. It does have a certain rustic charm, doesn't it? So no post-production polish this week, Seymour. Just straight from our microphones to their ear holes.
Exactly. No sonic sorcery, no digital doctoring. What you hear is what you get. And to really lean into this, Laces, fair approach, we even decided to employ the...
Yes, the later better to say old technique. A podcasting method shrouded in mystery and whispered about in hushed tones, though I'm not entirely sure if technique is the right word, Seymour. More of a happy accident, wouldn't you say?
Well, accident or technique, the result is the same. Pure, unbridled podcasting chaos. And it all started with, with a turtle.
Oh yes, the turtle, metaphorically speaking, of course. And because our podcast officially is now over 1 year old, it fits to reactivate the old stuff which started this big podcast adventure.
Yeah, a beautifully torturous analogy, dear. So buckle up, listeners, because this is going to be a slow and steady ride. And what exactly is this turtle paste tale we're about to unleash upon your unsuspecting eardrums?
Well, Seymour, it's a tale of technological terror, culinary confusion, and an unexpected house guest, all revolving around a certain paranoid android.
Oh dear, that's right. Marvin, the paranoid android. Good heavens, it feels like ages ago now. But yes, it all began one seemingly normal Memafield morning, or as normal as mornings ever get in Memafield, which, let's be honest, is not very normal at all.
I'm merely happy. Normalcy in Memafield is about as common as a polite conversation with Van Goat about their goat. So set the scene for us, Seymour. Take us back to that fateful morning.
Right. It was a Tuesday, I believe, or perhaps a Wednesday. Does it truly matter in the grand tapestry of Memafieldian madness? Regardless, the sun, or Cumulus rather, as Cumulus was feeling particularly sunny that day and didn't step in between the sun and Memafield, was just beginning to peek through the curtains in our rather cluttered kitchen.
Yeah, cluttered is a generous term, Seymour. Exploded spice rack might be more accurate.
It is not exploded. It is artistically disarranged and perfectly functional, might I add. Anyway, I, as is my morning ritual, decided to treat myself to a simple yet satisfying bowl of crusty O's, Memefield's delicious cereals.
Krusty, us, a breakfast of champions, or at least a breakfast of people who enjoy the occasional existential dread hidden within sugary cereal.
Oh, I am really sick. You know, the one above the sink.
The one precariously balanced on the verge of structural collapse. Yes, I know the one. Though I'm surprised it hasn't actually collapsed yet, given the sheer volume of things you insist on storing in there, Seymour.
They are not things. They are culinary essentials, and that cupboard is perfectly stable. It's, yes, rustic. Anyway, I opened the cupboard door, expecting to be greeted by the usual assortment of breakfast cereals, perhaps a rogue jar of pickled onions that somehow migrated from the pantry.
Pickled onions do have a certain nomadic quality, don't they? They seem to turn up in the most unexpected places.
Indeed. But what greeted me was not pickled onions, not crusty O's, not even a rogue Roomba, though those have been known to wander into the most peculiar locations.
Do tell, Seymour. Don't leave us in suspense. What culinary monstrosity had taken up residence in your surreal cupboard? Another one of your experimental cheese cultures?
My cheese cultures are not monstrosities. They are artisanal, and for your information, they are safely housed in the cheese cellar. No, Gary, what I found in the cupboard was Marvin.
Marvin? You mean Marvin the paranoid android, our surreal cupboard? Seymour, are you quite sure you weren't still asleep and dreaming? Perhaps you mistook old Bartholomew for a metal-clad android in your groggy state.
Yeah. And he doesn't fit in the cereal cupboard. Well, at least not in his normal state. Sometimes we take him apart if he wants to hibernate, and then he sleeps in a box. No, I am quite certain it was Marvin, not Bartholomew, sitting there amidst the boxes of sugar bombs and blueberry looking even more morose than usual.
But why? Why Marvin? Why our surreal cupboard? It's not exactly spacious or comfortable or particularly well ventilated.
Ah, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Marvin, as you know, he's Marvin. His motivations are often shrouded in a veil of existential despair and a profound dislike for almost everything. Marvin, the paranoid android, likes to hide in small cabinets. It's his thing, according to MemedHamsAI in episode 7105.
Indeed. Marvin's other hobbies include complaining about the universe and anticipating the inevitable heat death of everything. Cheerful chap he is not.
Cheerful is not the word that springs to mind, no. But there he was, Gary, in my cereal cupboard, looking utterly miserable, even for Marvin.
And what did you do, Seymour? Did you scream? Faint? Offer him a crusty O in a gesture of interspecies understanding?
I did not scream. And I certainly did not faint. I am not some delicate flower, Gary. I am Seymour Skinner, principal of Memafield Elementary Culinary, artisant, reasonably unflappable husband.
Reasonably unflappable? Seymour, you once panicked when we ran out of dill pickles. Reasonably might be an overstatement.
Dill pickles are a culinary necessity, Gary, and that was a moment of strategic culinary realignment, not panic. Anyway, I digress. No, I didn't panic. I simply stared at Marvin in the cupboard.
And Marvin, I presume, stared back with his usual expression of profound disappointment in the cosmos.
Precisely. Though I detected a hint of something else in his optical sensors that morning. A flicker of, dare I say, vulnerability.
Vulnerability, Marvin. Are you sure you weren't just projecting your own breakfast-deprived anxieties onto the poor android Seymour?
I was not breakfast-deprived. I was merely contemplating my cereal options, and I know vulnerability when I see it. Gary, even in a paranoid android. So I did what any compassionate, cereal-seeking husband would do. I spoke to him.
You spoke to Marvin in the surreal cupboard. What did you say? Good morning, Marvin. Care for a sugar bomb?
Don't be facetious, Gary. I am capable of nuanced conversation even with paranoid androids, I simply said. Is everything all right?
And Marvin's response, I assume, was a torrent of existential angst and predictions of imminent doom.
Well, yes, there was a bit of that naturally. But surprisingly, he also, well, he sort of explained himself.
Marvin explained himself voluntarily, without being prompted with a threat of deactivation. This is unprecedented. What did he say?
He said, and I quote, "The universe is a cruel and uncaring void, filled with nothing but suffering and disappointment. Therefore, this cupboard, while spatially restrictive and aesthetically unappealing, is marginally less unpleasant than the existential horror of everything else."
Well, that's remarkably concise for Marvin. Usually his pronouncements of despair are a bit more verbose.
Indeed. Perhaps the cereal cupboard was cramping his style, literally and figuratively. But the point is, Gary, Marvin was hiding.
And because cupboards apparently are marginally less depressing than the vast expanse of the cosmos, makes perfect sense in a Marvin-esque kind of way.
Precisely. So I stood there contemplating Marvin in the cereal cupboard, and Marvin contemplated the inherent meaninglessness of breakfast cereals. And then, you, my dear husband, finally decided to grace us with your presence.
Ah, yes, my grand entrance. Forgive me for my tardiness, Seymour. Meteorology waits for no man, not even for a husband embroiled in the cupboard. Based android encounter. I was just checking the Doppler radar, you see. Cumulus was looking rather fluffy this day. Might be a chance of sunshine later, or possibly a light drizzle of existential ennui. Memefield weather is notoriously unpredictable.
Indeed, but when you finally descended the stairs, Gary, and entered the kitchen, what was your reaction to the unusual tableau before you, me standing forlornly before the cereal cupboard and Marvin? Well, Marvin being Marvin.
Oh, Seymour, my reaction was utter bewilderment, naturally. I walked into the kitchen expecting to find you wrestling with Krakatoa, or perhaps negotiating a peace treaty between Gizmo and Mr. Jellybeans and Sonic's perpetually besieged Edgy. But no. There you were, staring into the cereal cupboard like it held the secrets of the universe. And then I saw him, Marvin, perched amongst the breakfast cereals like a metallic melancholic, surreal mascot gone rogue. It was surreal, even for Memefield. I believe my exact words were, Seymour, why is there an android in the cereal cupboard?
And my equally eloquent reply was, he says it's marginally less depressing than everything else.
Which in Marvin speak is practically a declaration of relative contentment. So there we were, Seymour, you and I facing this. Android in a cupboard conundrum. What did we do next? Did we try to evict him? Offer him a therapy session? Call technical support?
None of the above, dear. We did what any rational pet-owning podcast hosting couple living in Memefield would do. We embraced the absurdity. We decided to make a day of it.
A day of it? Yes, Marvin's Day Out or Marvin's Day. No, scratch that. Marvin's Day Out sounds much more jaunty and considerably less claustrophobic. So we decided to take Marvin on an adventure around Memefield, with Cosmo, of course.
Naturally, no Memefield adventure is complete without our bouncy, orb-shaped companion, Cosmo. You know, the one that is round his balls. He's practically the mascot of mayhem around here. And Marvin surprisingly agreed to this outing, though his agreement was punctuated by a lengthy lament about the futility of enjoyment and the inevitability of disappointment.
Ah, Marvin, always the optimist. So we managed to coax Marvin out of the cereal cupboard. No small feat, I assure you. It involved a gentle application of positive reinforcement and a strategically placed box of blueberry, I believe.
Indeed. Boars. So, lured by the promise of artificially flavored blueberry cereal, Marvin emerged from his cupboard, based sanctuary, and we were ready for our Marvin and Cosmo Memefield adventure.
Operation, android antics and orb-shaped merriment, or something equally alliterative and slightly less ridiculous sounding. But yes, we were off. First stop, Seymour. Where did we decide to inflict Marvin's unique brand of pessimism upon the unsuspecting populace of Memafield?
Yeah. Well, Gary, given Marvin's predilections, we took him to the Memafield Rock and Mineral Emporium.
Ah, yes, the Rock and Mineral Emporium, my personal happy place, a veritable treasure trove of geological delights, and a perfect place to ponder the vastness of time and the insignificance of pretty much everything. Perfect for Marvin.
Precisely. We figured if anything could resonate with Marvin's worldview, it would be a room full of ancient rocks, silently bearing witness to the slow, grinding march of geological epochs. And Cosmo, of course, loves anything shiny, so it was a win, win, win. Well, for us and Cosmo, at least, Marvin remained. Well, Marvin.
But even Marvin, I suspect, couldn't deny the sheer geological grandeur of the Emporium. Did he at least express mild indifference to the amethyst geodes, a flicker of existential boredom? At the fossilized trilobites,
He did, in fact, offer a slightly less negative pronouncement than usual. Upon beholding a particularly impressive display of quartz crystals, Marvin actually said, and I quote, "These crystalline structures, while superficially appealing, are ultimately destined to decay and crumble into dust. Much like all things in this transient and meaningless universe, however, they are marginally less offensive to my optical sensors than pastel colors."
Marginally less offensive than pastel colors. Seymour, that's practically high praise coming from Marvin. He's practically gushing with mineral appreciation. He's practically a geology enthusiast in android's clothing.
Don't get carried away, Gary. He still spent the majority of our visit lamenting the inevitable thermodynamic death of the universe and predicting the imminent collapse of the Emporium's roof. But baby steps, dear, baby steps. Angry and Cosmo, meanwhile, was having an absolute blast, bouncing gleefully between the display cases, mesmerized by the shimmering gemstones and the presumably delicious-looking rocks.
Cosmo's enthusiasm is truly infectious, isn't it? He can find joy in literally anything. A pile of rocks, a discarded sock, a particularly shiny pebble. He's a little orb of pure, unadulterated optimism. The polar opposite of Marvin, really. Perhaps that's why they make such an interesting duo.
Indeed. Yin and yang of Memafieldian companionship. Marvin, the embodiment of existential despair, and Cosmo, the bouncing ball of boundless glee. A truly unlikely, but somehow it worked. In a strange, Memafieldian kind of way. After the Rock and Mineral Emporium, where did our bizarre little entourage venture next, Gary?
Ah, yes. After our foray into the geological wonders of Memafield, we decided to broaden our horizons, shall we say. We took Marvin and Cosmo to Sonic's chili dog stand that he opened lately.
Sonic's chili dog stand. Are you quite mad? He is gnarling. All those bright colors, the frenetic energy, the overpowering aroma of chili dogs. I shudder to think what Marvin must have made of it all.
Precisely. That was the point, Seymour. We wanted to shake things up for Marvin a bit, to drag him out of his comfort zone of existential dread, to expose him to the unadulterated vibrancy of Memafieldian fast food culture. And besides, Cosmo adores chili dogs, especially the little miniature ones Sonic makes for him.
Cosmo does have a rather insatiable appetite for miniature chili dogs, doesn't he? And Sonic, bless his speedy little heart, is always happy to oblige. But Marvin, I just can't imagine Marvin appreciating the gustatory delights of a chili dog or the sonic boom-inducing energy of Sonic himself.
Well, you'd be partially correct, Seymour. Marvin did not exactly rave about the chili dogs. In fact, I believe his exact words were, "These processed meat tubes, while undeniably pungent, are merely another fleeting pleasure in a life ultimately devoid of meaning. Furthermore, the excessive sodium content is likely to contribute to premature organ failure.
Oh, Marvin, always bringing the cheer. But did he at least eat a chili dog? For the sake of cultural immersion?
He did, actually. He nibbled at a corner of one very tentatively, like it might spontaneously combust or philosophically challenge his worldview. And Cosmo, of course, devoured about 5 miniature ones, bouncing with delight, occasionally bumping into Marvin and coating his metallic shell in chili dog residue.
Oh dear, poor Marvin, covered in chili dog enthusiasm. It's a wonder he didn't short circuit from sheer overwhelming joy.
He did look rather perturbed, I must admit, but in a slightly different way than usual. Less existential despair, more mildly inconvenienced by sticky substances. It was progress, Seymour. And Sonic, naturally, was absolutely thrilled to have us there, especially Cosmo. He always gets a kick out of Cosmo's bounciness, and he even tried to engage Marvin in conversation.
Sonic, talking to Marvin, oh dear, that must have been something to behold. Sonic, the epitome of boundless energy and relentless optimism, trying to connect with Marvin. The paragon of, well, the opposite of all that. What happened? Did the universe implode from the sheer existential clash?
Not quite implode, no. Though there was a definite shift in the local space-time continuum. Sonic, in his usual ebullient manner, zipped right up to Marvin and said something along the lines of, "Hey there, buddy. Awesome robot. You new in town? Want a race? Chili dogs on me."
Oh, Sonic. So direct, so unburdened by existential angst. And Marvin's response, I can only imagine.
Marvin, bless his metallic heart, simply blinked slowly and replied in his usual monotone, "Racing is a pointless exercise in the futile pursuit of speed in a universe destined for entropy. And chili dogs, as previously established, are of questionable nutritional value."
Perfectly Marvin, utterly, wonderfully Marvin. And Sonic's reaction, did he short-circuit, explode from sheer bafflement?
Sonic just laughed. He threw his head back and let out that infectious supersonic giggle of his and said, "Whoa, dude, you are one serious robot. But hey, that's cool. More chili dogs for me then." And then he just zoomed off to serve another customer, leaving Marvin standing there, slightly confounded, I think. And Cosmo just bounced around them both, radiating pure, unadulterated chili dog. Fueled joy. It was a moment, Seymour. A true Memafield moment.
Indeed. Only in Memafield, Gary. Only in Memafield could you witness such a beautifully bizarre interaction. A paranoid android, a hyperactive hedgehog, and a bouncing orb of pure joy, all united by the questionable culinary merits of a chili dog. It's poetic, in a way. A very, very strange way.
Poetic chaos, Seymour. That's Memafield in a nutshell. And after our cultural exchange at Sonic's, where did our little band of misfits wander next? Did we dare to expose Marvin to even more Memafieldian madness?
Indeed we did, Gary. We decided to fully immerse Marvin in the vibrant tapestry of Memafieldian life. We took him to the Memafield petting zoo.
The petting zoo, Seymour. Are you trying to induce a complete android meltdown? The petting zoo is utter pandemonium. Kids screaming, goats bleating, miniature ponies attempting to eat your shoelaces. It's sensory overload on steroids. Sensory. And Marvin with his delicate sensibilities.
His delicate sensibilities consist primarily of a deep-seated loathing for all organic life, Gary. But that's precisely why we took him there, to challenge his preconceptions, to force him to confront the sheer, unadulterated fluffiness of the animal kingdom. And Cosmo, of course, was in absolute heaven. He adores fluffy things, especially baby goats.
Oh, Cosmo and baby goats. A match made in Memafieldian heaven. I can just picture it now. Cosmo bouncing amidst a herd of miniature goats, radiating pure, orb-shaped joy, while Marvin, presumably maintained a safe distance, radiating pure and roid-shaped disdain.
You are remarkably accurate in your assessment, dear. Cosmo was indeed in raptures, frolicking amongst the baby goats, attempting to communicate with them in his own bouncy language, and the baby goats, to their credit, seemed to understand him, or at least tolerate his enthusiastic presence. Marvin, on the other hand, positioned himself strategically near the entrance, maintaining a pragmatic distance from the animal enclosures. He did, however, offer a running commentary on the biological inefficiencies of organic life and the inevitable decline of the petting zoo's structural integrity.
Marvin, the voice of reason amidst the bleating and bouncing. Did he interact with any of the animals at all? He did. A particularly charming llama perhaps managed to crack his stoic facade. Did a fluffy bunny rabbit melt his metallic heart?
Alas, no llamas were charmed, and no bunny rabbits were heart-meltingly effective. However, there was an incident involving a particularly inquisitive alpaca.
An alpaca incident? Oh, do tell, Seymour. Alpacas are notoriously unpredictable creatures. What manner of alpaca-related mayhem did Marvin manage to endure?
Well, it was quite innocent, really. A young alpaca, clearly intrigued by Marvin's unusual appearance, wandered over to him and nuzzled his leg.
Nuzzled his leg. An alpaca attempted to befriend Marvin? This is extraordinary. Well, what was Marvin's reaction? Did he faint? Scream. Initiate self-destruct sequence.
He did not faint, and he certainly did not scream, though I suspect he may have briefly considered self-destructing. No, Marvin simply froze, completely and utterly frozen, like a metallic statue in a petting zoo. The alpaca, undeterred by Marvin's lack of responsiveness, continued to nuzzle his leg, occasionally emitting soft, alpaca-like noises. And then something unexpected happened.
Unexpected? Do tell. My suspense levels are reaching critical mass. Did Marvin reciprocate the nuzzle? Did he purr? Did he? He began to appreciate the existential beauty of alpacas.
Not quite purr, no. But Marvin spoke to the alpaca in a voice so quiet, so almost gentle that I almost didn't hear it. He said, and I quote, "Please desist. Organic contact is..."
Organic contact is suboptimal. Seymour, that's practically affectionate for Marvin. He's practically engaging in interspecies communication. He's practically making friends with an alpaca. This is miraculous. Did the alpaca understand? Did they embark on a profound philosophical discussion about the merits of organic versus inorganic life?
Alas, no profound philosophical discussions ensued. Well, how? Less fluffy to a heart seemed unfazed by Marvin's pronouncements. It simply continued to nuzzle him for a few more moments. Marvin remained frozen, uttering occasional quiet protests about suboptimal organic contact, and then the alpaca wandered off to find, presumably, a more responsive nuzzling partner, and Marvin unfroze and promptly resumed his usual posture of existential gloom.
Oh, Marvin and his alpaca encounter, a true testament to the unpredictability of Memophieldian adventure. So after our animalistic interlude at the petting zoo, where did our day of android antics and orb-shaped merriment lead us next, Seymour? Did we subject Marvin to even more Memophieldian delights?
Indeed, Gary, we did. To fully complete Marvin's Memophieldian immersion experience, we knew there was one place we simply had to take him. The place that embodies the very heart and soul of Memophieldian eccentricity. We took him to the Memofield Meme Museum.
The Meme Museum, Seymour. Are you sure that was wise in the retrospective? The Meme Museum is a kaleidoscope of chaotic imagery, flashing lights, and death earworm, inducing sound loops. It's designed to overwhelm the senses, to assault the very fabric of reality. I feared for Marvin's android sanity.
Nonsense, Gary. The Meme Museum is a celebration of cultural creativity, a testament to the absurdist humor of the internet age. And besides, Marvin needed exposure to new experiences, even if those experiences involved endless loops of steamed hams and disturbingly catchy cat videos. And Cosmo, of course. was intrigued by the flashing lights and the presumably bouncy pixelated images on the screens.
Cosmo and bouncy things. Another match made in Memafieldian electromagnetic heaven. I can just imagine Cosmo bouncing through the Meme Museum, a blur of orb-shaped enthusiasm, amidst a cacophony of memes and internet absurdity. And Marvin, meanwhile, I assume, was silently judging the entire exhibition, lamenting the intellectual decay of modern society.
You are uncannily accurate once again, dear. Cosmo was indeed entranced by the flashing lights, while Marvin, on the other hand, positioned himself strategically near the exit, emitting a constant stream of quietly scathing commentary on the exhibits. He declared the steamed Hams meme to be algorithmically repetitive. Well, tell that to the MemedHamsAI community, and the cat videos to be superficially diverting, and the entire concept of internet memes to be a symptom of societal intellectual decline.
Oh, Marvin, never change. Did he find anything even remotely redeeming about the Meme Museum experience? Did a particularly philosophically profound meme perhaps manage to penetrate his cynicism? Did a surprisingly existentially relevant cat video move him to tears? Android tears, of course, presumably oil-based.
Tears, alas, remained unshed. However, there was one exhibit that briefly captured Marvin's attention, an exhibit dedicated to vintage computer error messages.
Vintage computer error messages. Seymour, are you serious? The Meme Museum has an exhibit dedicated to failed technology? That's remarkably niche, even from Emmafield, but intriguing. What did Marvin make of it all? Did he feel a sense of nostalgic solidarity with these digital relics of technological frustration?
Perhaps a touch of solidarity, yes. Marvin did, in fact, pause before the error message exhibit for a measurable amount of time. He studied the pixelated images of blue screens of death, the red ring of death, the white ring of death and syntax errors with a contemplative air. And then he spoke, in a voice that was, dare I say, almost reverent. He said, and I quote, "These digital lamentations, while ultimately indicative of technological fallibility, possess a certain stark poetry. They are honest in their portrayal of systemic failure, a refreshing contrast to the superficial optimism of contemporary digital culture."
Stark poetry, honest portrayal of systemic failure. Seymour, Marvin is practically weeping with artistic appreciation. He's practically, meme connoisseur, he's practically ready to curate his own exhibit of existential error messages. This is a breakthrough, a Marvinian masterpiece. Peace. The Meme Museum has transformed him.
Don't get ahead of yourself, Gary. He still declared the rest of the Meme Museum to be a cacophony of digital detritus and predicted the building would spontaneously combust due to meme-induced structural instability. But baby steps, dear baby steps. The vintage error message exhibit resonated with him, in a way that chitty dogs and baby goats and Cosmo, meanwhile, continued to bounce through the museum, happily oblivious to the existential nuances of vintage error messages, thoroughly enjoying the flashing lights and the presumably bouncy pixelated images. A truly eclectic cultural experience for all.
Indeed, Seymour. A truly Memafieldian cultural experience. And after our foray into the digital delights and digital lamentations of the Meme Museum, where did our day of Marvinian mayhem and orb-shaped exuberance conclude? Did we finally release Marvin back into the wild? Did we attempt to return him to his surreal cupboard sanctuary? Because, like Van Gogh said, that's Marvin's thing these days, hiding in small cabinets.
Not quite yet, Gary. We felt that Marvin's Memafield immersion experience would be incomplete without one final rite of passage. One last essential Memafieldian activity. We took him to... now drum roll, please. Swampy Swamp.
Swampy Swamp, Seymour. Are you actively trying to drive Marvin into a state of permanent catatonia? Whoa? Swampy Swamp is sensory deprivation on steroids. It's murky, it's muddy, it's swampy. It's full of swamp creatures, mosquitoes the size of small birds, frogs that croak existential pronouncements at midnight, and Swampy himself, who, while friendly, is still a swamp monster. Oh, I shudder to think what Marvin made of that.
Nonsense, Gary. And besides, Marvin needed grounding to reconnect with the earthiness of existence, to contemplate the primeval ooze of creation. And Cosmo, of course, was curious about the presumably bouncy lily pads and the potentially edible swamp creatures.
Cosmo and potentially edible swamp creatures. Another potentially disastrous Memofieldian pairing. I can just imagine Cosmo bouncing through the swamp, happily sampling lily pads and attempting to ingest the local fauna, while Marvin presumably maintained a safe distance, radiating pure android-shaped swamp aversion.
You are once again remarkably prescient, dear. Cosmo was indeed in his element in Swampy's swamp, in search of swamp-based snacks. Swampy himself emerged from the depths to greet us, his usual jovial self, and attempted to engage Marvin in conversation.
Swampy talking to Marvin. Oh, this is getting better and better, listeners. What did Swampy say? Did he offer Marvin a tour of his humble abode? Did he attempt to share his swamp-based wisdom? Did he offer him a complimentary mud bath?
No mud baths were offered, thankfully, but Swampy, in his usual gregarious manner, did try to make Marvin feel welcome. He boomed, in his deep but actually very high swampy voice, something along the lines of, "Howdy there, metal fella. Welcome to my swamp. Hope you like it murky and slightly mosquito. Yai, care for a freshly caught dragonfly? They're extra crunchy today."
Freshly caught dragonfly. Swampy's culinary offerings are certainly unique. And Marvin's reaction to this swampy hospitality, did he faint? Flee? Initiate aquatic self-destruct sequence this time.
He did not faint, and he certainly did not flee, though. Again, I suspect self-destruction may have crossed his metallic mind once again. No, Marvin simply stared at Swampy, his optical sensors blinking slowly, and then, in his usual monotone, he replied, "Swamps are ecologically vital but aesthetically displeasing, and dragonflies, while possessing a certain aerodynamic efficiency, are ultimately transient and insignificant in the face of cosmic oblivion. Furthermore, I do not consume organic matter."
Oh, Marvin, he's unbelievable. Completely, utterly, wonderfully. Marvin, Swampy's reaction to that pronouncement. I can only imagine. Did he deflate? Disintegrate into a puddle of swamp goo? Retreat back into the murky depths, heartbroken by androidian apathy?
Not at all, Gary. Swampy, bless his swampy soul, simply chuckled. He let out a deep, rumbling swamp monster chuckle that shook the lily pads and startled a flock of presumably existential swamp birds. And he boomed, "Well, ain't you a gloomy Gus, metal fella? But hey, that's all right. More dragonflies for me then." And then he just plunged back into the swamp, leaving Marvin standing there, slightly taken aback. I think, and Cosmo, of course, just continued to bounce happily through the swamp, radiating pure, orb-shaped swamp joy, occasionally bumping into Marvin and coating his metallic shell in swamp mud.
Oh, Seymour, this is priceless. Marvin in Swampy Swamp. It's the quintessential Memofieldian tableau. A perfect ending to our Marvin and Cosmo Memofield adventure. So, after our swampy sojourn, did we finally return Marvin to his cupboard-based comfort zone?
Indeed, Gary, we did. As the sun, or rather, Cumulus, who was feeling a bit more mellow by that point, began to set over Memofield, we escorted Marvin back to our humble abode. Cosmo, exhausted but exhilarated from his day of Memofieldian exploration, bounced happily beside us, occasionally humming a presumably swamp tune. Marvin predictably remained. Marvin, silent, morose, and radiating an aura of profound disappointment in the universe.
And when we reached our kitchen, Seymour, did we simply deposit Marvin back into his surreal cupboard sanctuary? Did we bid him a fond farewell until his next cupboard-based epiphany?
Yeah. He settled himself amongst the boxes of breakfast cereals, resuming his usual posture of existential contemplation. One last time, for the day.
His farewell address? Oh, do tell, Seymour. What pearls of androidian wisdom did Marvin bestow upon us as he retreated back into his cupboard-based domain? Did he offer a slightly less negative assessment of Memafieldian life after his day of adventure? Did he express a fleeting flicker of gratitude?
A gratitude, alas, remained elusive, but his farewell pronouncement was surprisingly nuanced. He said, and I quote, "This day, while ultimately futile in the grand scheme of cosmic insignificance, was marginally less unpleasant than remaining in the cereal cupboard. However, I shall now resume my contemplation of the inevitable heat death of the universe. Farewell." And with that he fell silent. The cupboard door closed, and Marvin was gone back to his cupboard-based existential reverie. And when we opened it again, Marvin was gone. Very crazy.
Marginally less unpleasant, Seymour. That's practically a rave review for Memafield coming from Marvin. That's practically a declaration of love. He's practically Memafield's biggest fan. Secretly, of course, very secretly.
Indeed, Gary. Marvin, Memafield's unlikely ambassador, who knew. And Cosmo, of course, after a day of Memafieldian mayhem, simply curled up at our feet, emitting contented orb-shaped vibrations. And we, my dear husband, were left to contemplate the utter absurdity of our day with Marvin and Cosmo. And you wonder when Marvin might next grace us with his cupboard.
Indeed, Seymour. Who knows when Marvin might reappear? Perhaps he's lurking in the spice rack right now. Or perhaps he's taken up residence in the Roomba charging station. With Marvin, the possibilities are endlessly depressing, and yet strangely endearing.
Indeed, Gary. Marvin, a true Memafieldian enigma, and a reminder that even in the most chaotic and absurd towns, even amidst the most profound existential despair, there is always room for a little bit of, expected joy, especially when bouncing orbs and chilly dogs are involved.
Beautifully said, Seymour. Beautifully said. And on that note, dear listeners, we must bid you adieu. Thank you for joining us on this turtle-paced journey through our day with Marvin and Cosmo, so to speak. Reek, we hope you enjoyed the unvarnished truth of our podcasting prowess. And we hope, Rachel, Rox is satisfied with our unedited offering.
Indeed. And a special thank you to Rachel Rox for the brilliant and slightly terrifying suggestion. I am really... Until next week, stay absurd, stay Memafieldian, and keep an eye on your cereal cupboards. You never know who might be hiding in there. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone. And remember, don't let the existential dread get you down. Unless, of course, you're Marvin, in which case, embrace it. It's practically your brand. Farewell.